The honourable member for Mississauga-Streetsville.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, Canada is deeply concerned about the recent increase in violence in Iraq and its humanitarian consequences. Canada certainly condemns, in the strongest terms, the targeting of civilians and religious minorities. And we are deeply concerned by reports of possible war crimes and crimes against humanity. That is why we continue to call on all of the parties in the conflict to respect international humanitarian law. Mr. Speaker, in late August, I visited the cities of Erbil and Duhok in Iraq as part of an observer team sponsored by the Reverend Majid Al-Shafi and One Free World International. And we met personally with the international displaced persons, the IDPs, on the ground in the UNHCR camps that have been established. Mr. Speaker, I can't start to say that their stories were heart-wrenching. We sat on the ground and in the tents of our fellow human beings, and I have to tell you, their plight is unbelievable. This is an unspeakable tragedy for which there is no excuse. And the humanitarian situation in Iraq continues to deteriorate as armed clashes between the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, ISIL as we know, and government forces drive displacement. Since January, an estimated 1.7 million people have been displaced throughout the country, which represents 1/3 of the largest cases of international displacement in the world. Basic services, including health care and water infrastructure, are disrupted, resulting in an acute humanitarian needs. The intensity of fighting in ISIL-held areas has resulted in a security situation that does not allow humanitarian organizations to operate. And the persecution of minority groups who I met with, including Christians, Yazidis, Shabak, and Turk and Shia, is an ongoing concern. Current displacement near the Kurdish region of Iraq has been only the latest development in a trend of large-scale displacements across Iraq that go back to the beginning of the year. In early 2014, conflict displaced an estimated 475,000 people in Anbar province. And then in June, an estimated 571,000 people were displaced from Mosul. And in August, an additional 662,000 people were displaced from the Sinjar area, when tens of thousands of Yazidis remained trapped for several days in dire humanitarian conditions. The size and pace of displacement has overwhelmed the local communities who I met with, including the Duhok Governorate, which is hosting now more than 400,000 internally displaced persons. And Mr. Speaker, when I met with local officials in Duhok we talked about their needs. And I know that Canada will continue to help in providing assistance for housing and medical needs, particularly as the winter season approaches. On August the 12th, the United Nations declared the situation a Level 3 emergency, underlining the gravity of the crisis. As a result, the humanitarian response in accessible areas is being rapidly scaled up, and humanitarian leadership will be bolstered. Approximately 35% of internally displaced Iraqis are living in vulnerable conditions in schools, churches, mosques, and unfinished buildings. We met with the largest group of IDPs, Mr. Speaker, in a half-built school in Duhok the last day that our delegation was there. There is a concern that the schools will have to be converted back to allow children, obviously, to attend school, and they will have no place to go. Mr. Speaker, Canada is actively working with partners to address the children's needs and to see what more we can do. We are currently working through experienced partners such as Save the Children and the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees to help provide child-friendly environments for displaced children and give them the psychological support that they need. We believe that when adults fight, children's education should not suffer, and the continued academic growth of children must be secured even in the face of conflict. The flows of IDPs are also place considerable strain on health structures, and many health facilities are overwhelmed with large caseloads. I met with the Director of Health in HOC, and he explained these situations to me on the ground. In addition, food security is a growing concern, and normal supply routes have been interrupted by conflict and insecurity. The next harvest is at risk in the areas affected by the conflict, and that accounts for nearly 1/3 of Iraq's wheat production. Millions of Iraqis are likely to face food shortages later this year unless the challenges are resolved. A key challenge for the humanitarian community continues to be the difficulty of being able to get into the conflict areas to reach people who really need our help. The sheer number of different locations people have fled to, as well as their mobility, adds a layer of complexity that makes matters even more difficult for humanitarian organizations. Mr. Speaker, Canada is working through experienced humanitarian partners, such as the United Nations humanitarian agencies, International Red Cross or Red Crescent movement, and non-governmental organizations to get life-saving assistance, and I saw it on the ground, getting to those who need it. To date, Canada has provided more than $28 million in humanitarian assistance to Iraq, of which $18.8 million will address needs from the conflict, $9.6 million will be used to address the needs of Syrian refugees who have sought refuge in Iraq due to the conflict in their own home country. We work to provide support across a range of needs to ensure that there are no gaps. Canada's funding is helping to meet the health, shelter, water, and sanitation protection of those who need it. For example, we're providing mobile health through clinics through Plan Canada, as well as providing medical supplies to the International Committee of the Red Cross. The Canadian Red Cross is currently looking to determine what more can be done. On August 28th, Mr. Speaker, our first plane load of humanitarian relief supplies arrived, and more will be done. Mr. Speaker, Canada is currently the fifth largest donor to this response to the crisis. And it is worth noting that we are also the fifth largest donor to the UN's Central Emergency Response Fund that has provided more than $10.8 million in response to the Iraq crisis. You know, Mr. Speaker, when I was on the ground, we also had the opportunity to meet with our ambassador to Iraq and Jordan, Bruno Sacamoni, and I had an opportunity to ask what we are doing on the ground. His report back to us was outstanding, that Canada truly is a leader, that we have shown great initiative and great support, and that our people on the ground there are fully committed to making sure Canada's role in humanitarian and other assistance to the Kurdish government, to the Iraqi national government, is clearly there. So, Mr. Speaker, I just want to conclude by saying I have to say it was a profoundly moving experience for me as a member of this House to visit Iraq, to meet with the victims of these ISIL attacks. I will never forget that as long as I live. Fathers, mothers, children, grandpas, grandmas, friends of a community that had their friends and neighbors slaughtered in these attacks, escaped with their lives to try and rebuild. It was profoundly moving. I want to thank One Free World International for taking the time to invite me and two of our colleagues from this House to join them, to meet with these people, and to share Canada's support. May God continue to bless them all, and may we all pray for all of them for peace and for better days ahead. Thank you.